Hi everybody, it's Richard here again and welcome to another video. Now, about 3 years ago I did a rundown of my top 100 artists of all time, and it was done through an Excel document as a points-based system, and I jiggled it about a bit to make sure some were higher than others, but I was never 100% happy with it. Now, I'm not going to do 100 artists again. I'm just going to give you my true, what I feel are my true top 10 artists of all time. Now, I take into consideration how I actually felt at the time when I was listening to these artists, and also the longevity of them, if I still do like them. And so I have made a list of 10 which I believe I am happy with. There are some big omissions and I'll go through that just before I start. But what I will do is I'm going to show you a starter album of each of these artists as well, which I think is a good introduction. Not a greatest hits, just a starter album. Okay, before I hit the top 10, and a few bubbling unders that didn't manage to get in, and it's Paul McCartney and Wings, the Beatles, the Kinks, even the Rolling Stones, which I think were second in my other list, didn't manage to get in, Mike Oldfield, and a few others, ELO as well. So coming in at number 10 for me, and I think this is the best starter album for the Smiths, and I was blown away by the Smiths whenever they came out in 1983 with This Charming Man, and I bought every single of them on the week of release. I bought every album, including the 2 compilation albums, Hatful of Hollow and World Won't Listen. The Smiths, for me, saved the 1980s. I thought they were brilliant. I was obsessed by them, and I still do really like them, and I like Morrissey's solo career as well. That's another thing. I am not sticking a solo career onto a band to boost the ratings on this. It's just the Smiths. So the Smiths get my number 10, and this, The Queen Is Dead, has 2 hit singles, Big Mouth Strikes Again and The Boy with a Thorn in the Side. I would love to see the singles album, which was on CD, be released on double vinyl. I think it would be great. But for me, the Smiths get number 10, and this is their best album, and I think it's the best starter as well. At number 9, and it is The Jam, and the starter album for me is All Mod Cons, with the 3 A-sides, David Watson, A-Bomb and Water Street, which was double A-side, and Down the Tube Station at Midnight. Again, in the very early 80s, I was obsessed by them. I told the story before about buying, I think it was 6 singles from my brother's friend for very little money, and I played them to death, and then I just bought everything up by them. Unfortunately, it was about a year and a half later that they split up. So I wasn't a fan during, the best period, but still I loved everything by The Jam, although the last single is a little bit disappointing. So The Jam get my number 9. At number 8, and it is Queen, and I was wondering which one to pick for this, and I'm going to pick this as the starter album because this was the first album I actually owned and loved and played to death, and I mean to death because I got a little bit sick of it, and it's A Day at the Races, and I think this is magnificent, from 1976. It has Somebody to Love on it, which is brilliant, Good Old Fashioned Lover Boy as well, which is brilliant, and Tie Your Mother Down. Now, I am a Queen fan from 1973, and I would even extend it now up to 1986 because I have got a new appreciation for A Kind of Magic. The last 2 albums I'm not as keen on, but anything from 73 up to say 78 jazz is absolutely brilliant, and it's stood the test of time for me, although in the 80s I still love Hot Space and the works. So my number 8 is Queen. At number 7 is Elton John, and the album I'm going to pick for Elton, I'm not going to pick Goodbye Yellow Brick Road because I think it's difficult to start off with a double album. So I think this is as good as any to start off with, and it's 1972's Hunky Chateau, which features Rocket Man and Hunky Cat and the magnificent Mona Lisas and Mad Hatters. Now, everything that Elton did from 1970, the second album, up to 1978, Single Man, I think is really top notch. And his 80s stuff, it's not as good. There's some good material in there, and I'll say the same for the 90s and the 2000s. But the period, as I said, from 70 to 78 is really untouchable, and that's why he gets into my top 10 at number 7. Okay, number 6, and it's glam rock band, and it is Slade, and the album I'm going to choose as a starter is Old New Bourbon Blue from 1974, which has the 2 hit singles, Every Day and My Friend Stan, and it has got some of those Slade stumpers like Do We Still Do It and We're Really Gonna Raise the Roof. Now, my brother was a big fan of Slade at the time, and I knew all these songs because they were coming from his bedroom. Whenever he left, I started buying the albums myself, and I just think they are brilliant. Now, the 4 members are still alive. I'd love to see them record one more album. Yes, they look stupid in the 70s, but the quality of the songwriting was so high. Jim Lee and Noddy Holder, especially Jim Lee, was so melodic. Like, even off this you get things like Miles Out to Sea and When the Lights Are Out, and they're very Beatlesque, and they are absolutely brilliant. And they had 6 number 1 hit singles in the UK. 3 of them in 1973 went straight in at number 1, and their Christmas single, Merry Christmas Everybody, sells every year. So Slade get my number 6. At number 5, and they had very few albums, and I'm only counting them as a duo, and it is Simon and Garfunkel, which it was the greatest hits that my mother had that, you know, made me go out and buy their albums. Now, this was around 1981, and I'd wanted a new artist. My brother was seriously into Bob Dylan, and I thought, well, Paul Simon sounds good because this LP, the greatest hits, is brilliant. So this was the very first one I bought, and it's Sounds of Silence. Now, this is the UK version, and it has Homeward Bound on it. If you were going to go the American route, I would say Parsley, Sage, Rosemary and Thyme, because it has Homeward Bound on it. So whichever one has Homeward Bound on it, it enhances, and I absolutely love this. I love the electric version of Sounds of Silence. I love I Am a Rock, and even the ones like Leaves That Are Green. Kathy's song is beautiful, and so is April Come She Will, and even the 60s, we've got a really good thing going. I think these 2 are magnificent. Paul Simon's writing in the 60s was unbeatable, really. He did do a lot of good stuff in the 70s and 80s, but he produced the masterpiece Bridge Over Troubled Water, which I wouldn't suggest you start with. I would say this, and then whenever it comes to Bridge Over Troubled Water, you'll be wowed. So Simon Garfunkel is my number 5. My number 4 is Nick Lowe, and I got into him actually in the late 80s. I've told the story of that before. And the album I would probably pick is Labour of Lust, which is his 2nd album, and this is effectively a Rockpile album. Really good new wave songs, and it's got tracks on it like Cruel to Be Kind, which everybody knows, and Cracking Up, which is a fantastic song that even Tom Petty covered. But songs like Without Love, Dose of You, Endless Grey Ribbon, and even American Squirm, which is on the American version, not on the UK version, they're absolutely brilliant. And his music was quite poppy to an extent in the 80s, and then in the 90s onwards he slowed it all down, and I call it music for 40s plus, but it is absolutely brilliant. I think he's so underrated. I think he's a magnificent songwriter. So Nick Lowe gets my number 4. Okay, my number 3, and I think my top 3 will be guessed by everybody, and my number 3 is Abba. And the album I would suggest you start with actually is the first Greatest Hits, the Park Bench one, but I'm not picking Greatest Hits. Arrival. Arrival is their best album. It has 3 huge hit singles in Money Money Money, Dancing Queen and Knowing Me, Knowing You. This is pop perfection. In fact, all their albums are pop perfection. I think Benny Anderson's one of the strongest songwriters ever. Bjorn does the words, Benny does the music, and they're fronted by 2 brilliant singers, and to top it all off, they're both gorgeous, Frida and Agneta. So ABBA, 9 number 1 hit singles in the UK, and I think they've had 9 number 1 albums. It's either 9 or 10. I think it's 10 now, so yeah, absolutely brilliant. And whenever Voyage came out a couple of years ago, again, it's hard to believe, it's a year and a half ago, you know, I was just ecstatic, really was. So ABBA get my number 3. My number 2, and it is TRex, and the album I would pick is probably Electric Warrior to start with Get It On, Jeepster, Mambo Sun, Motivator, Life's Gas, and Cosmic Dancer, which is now one of his most famous songs. No, it's not my favourite. My favourite is Tanks, but I can understand this being people's favourites. So yeah, TRex, absolutely love them. I love the Tyrannosaurus Rex years from 68 to 70, and I always told this story as well, but whenever I got into these guys in 1980, it was very difficult to get their EMI records, so for about 3 years I was missing about 3 of their 70s studio albums, or EMI studio albums, which I finally got in 1983. Everything that Mark Bolan does, you know, I'm just a fan. I'm just a massive fan, and they get my number 2. I should say Mark Bolan, because he really was just T-Rex. So number 2. And my number 1, and no surprise as well, is David Bowie, and I would suggest that Ziggy Stardust, or The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust, Spiders from Mars, would be the gateway if you didn't know anything about Bowie. Not my favourite. Diamond Dogs is my favourite, but this is top 5 anyway, and this is brilliant with Starman and 5 Years, Soul Love, Moon Age Daydream, Ziggy Stardust itself, Suffragette City, Rock and Roll Suicide. An absolutely brilliant album, and it was the first one as well that I bought of David Bowie, and it started, it was 1980 again, so I have been a Bowie fan for 43 years, and I've never looked back, and he is the best artist ever in my book. So David Bowie, number 1. So that's my top 10 favourite artists of all time, my true favourite artists of all time. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope to have another video quite soon. All the best now. Bye bye.